Well, good afternoon, everybody. I'm Bill White, coordinator for the Missouri Native Grasslands Collaborative, and I've been working with our speakers for today to organize and get this um, training put on for today. We are recording this because we're going to put it on YouTube so it'll be available to others who may not have been able to participate today. And at the end, I'd like to share a few additional trainings that we've got in the works and some future training subjects that we'll be offering into next summer. So with that, we will go ahead and get started. Our first speaker is David Hoover. He's with Quail Forever and coordinates the Monarch programs for them. And he's going to kick it off with basic habitat requirements. We will take questions after each speaker if there are questions, and I will monitor the chat if you'd rather put something in the chat, a question in the chat, rather than ask it online. So with that, I will turn it over to you, David.
Okay, thanks, Bill. Let me get on the right slide here. So, okay, again, my name's Dave Hoover, Monarch Programs Coordinating Wildlife Biologist with Quail Forever in Missouri. And so I'm going to talk today some basics for habitat for our native bees and honeybees, and then butterflies as well. We won't go into a lot on moths, but they play an important part in our pollinator community as well. So a little bit about me first, just real quick, is most of my career, I'm not an entomologist, I'm a wildlife biologist. Most of my career has been spent with working on grassland systems, kind of at the large scale and kind of at that macro species habitat interaction. And as an upland bird hunter, obviously, I always, and as a biologist, always knew that our invertebrate, were critically important to many of the other vertebrate species that we were trying to manage and create habitat for. But recently, it with all the kind of turmoil that our pollinators populations have been going through, it really is kind of driven home, the importance of drilling down a little bit and truly understanding one, just how important they are to us as human beings, but also just what it requires to have good habitat for these species. So, just a brief overview. Why should we care about pollinators? We'll talk about honeybees, which probably the most thought of pollinator by most people. And particularly, we'll go into the native bees, butterflies, and then kind of sprinkled throughout, we'll talk about some of the habitat, and it's really pretty basic when you think about it. And our other speakers will go into a little more detail, I think, about how to create it and how to maintain it. So with that, in addition to honeybees, which we'll talk about here, our native bee species, we've got a little over 4,000 native ground nesting and twig nesting species here in the U.S. And most of them
don't you go running off, you dirt.
Somebody needs to mute, but most of them are stingless, and which a lot of people probably don't think about. And butterflies, which are probably the most commonly thought of pollinator, if you will, probably the most charismatic. But we also have, like I said, many species of moths, beetles, flies, birds, and even bats. Not so much in North America, but around the world, bats are a significant pollinator in some places. Of course, our invertebrates really are the backbone foundation of our food web. You got your primary producers and then primary consumers, which then support our secondary consumers. And you think about our bird species, and particularly our grassland birds. 90% of North American bird species feed insects, and a lot of that is insect larvae to their young. And it's critical to not only the survival of those bird species, but also bats, freshwater fish, and even us as human beings. Often we overlook that, but it is important. And if you just look at the black-capped chickadee, a very common species here in the Midwest, one pair raising their young just in 3 hours foraging time, they might collect, caterpillars from 17 different species, and that may come off just a few trees, a little stretch of riparian woods or whatever that they're feeding on, and in the 16 days to raise that brood, that can could be over 9,000 caterpillars, and so that's pretty amazing, really, when you think about it, and just the sheer volume of insects that really that this whole food web requires to sustain itself. Now, you know, the insect apocalypse is here. That's a headline from a investigative study, a report that New York Times did in 2018, and they were really just kind of bringing to light some recent research that did, and that folks have been, I guess, singing for many years. And one study there in 2017 in Germany, this was in a nature preserve that was fairly well protected. They'd lost 75% of their flying insects in those nature preserves that they studied. And one study in 2020 estimated that we're losing about 9% of the insect species each decade. And that's just a tremendous volume and abundance when you do the math over any one decade. So when people think about pollinators and maybe paired with, insect or population declines, monarchs is one that comes to mind quite often, and for good reason. At least when you look at the data over the last 30 years, um, monarchs, the eastern population, the bulk of them migrate from the Midwest, upper Midwest, basically between the Appalachians and the Rockies. They migrate down to an area in central Mexico to a forested tract, and they roost in trees, and they'll completely cover the trees. But back in the 90s, mid 90s, they were covering 18 hectares, so let's say 40 acres of land area that they were just completely covering for roosting. Now that's roughly 4 acres, so a little over acre or 1.5 hectares, 3 to 4 acres is all it's covering. So they've been on a significant population decline, and that's one of the things that's really brought to light the problem that we have with pollinators and sounding the alarm, if you will, and that really feeds into some of other some reasons for some of our other population losses. Kind of a well-renowned study in 2019 estimated that we lost almost 3 billion birds in terms of overall abundance. What was present in 1970 and what was present in 2019. That's the number of birds that we've lost in terms, not species, obviously, but just overall abundance. And grassland birds and our aerial insectivores were heavily hit. Uh, Look at the eastern meadowlark, about 75% population, 3 and 4 meadowlarks we've lost since 1970. That's pretty striking. And if you really think about it, how often do you hear them anymore? You still see them in the wintertime quite a bit when they're bunching up, but it's striking what's happening. And insect populations have something to do with it as it relates to habitat overall. So it's not just our native wildlife either. Talk about how they're important to us. 87 of the top 115 of our, you know, um, food crops globally depend upon pollinators, and that's about 35% of the human food supply. So that's where you've heard, thank a pollinator for one. That's kind of where that number comes from, and 75% of our world's plants and 90% of North America's native flowering plants depend upon pollination to reproduce. And from an economic standpoint, that's over $500 billion globally in food production. So not something to look at lightly. And bees in general, that includes honeybees and native bees, are really considered the most important pollinators. And they were actually declared one of the most important or the most important living being on Earth in 2019. So I'm guessing there's some biologists of other taxa out there that may refute that. But the point is, they're critically important to the food web and to us as we move forward. Uh, the thing about bees is they actively collect and transport pollen, and they exhibit something called flower constancy. And what that means is that they will visit. Let's say they're visiting, bergamot or bee balm, you may know it as. They're typically going to be foraging on that plant and move to another bee balm and another bee. They're going to be foraging on the same plant species at the same time, and that really kind of increases the efficiency of the pollination. And as we'll see, that's a little different than what butterflies do. But so that's one of the things that make them unique. And they tend to just forage in a central area around the nest. So they're very deliberate foragers, if you will. The honeybee, they really important and probably what people recognize as a pollinator. And our pollinators are in trouble and they think honeybees. They haven't had a good go of it lately either. Tremendously important to our ag sector. $20 billion in U.S. Agricultural alone can be attributed to them. They're not native to the U.S. They're kind of naturalized. They came in the 1600s to provide beeswax and honey. And another reason that they're so well known is because their byproduct, the honey, is so popular. It doesn't spoil and it can sustain life, honey that is. So another kind of claim to fame of the honeybee and why it gets so much recognition, maybe over some of our natives. Now, it is what we consider a pollinator. It's not the most efficient pollinator. Maybe about 5% of the flowers that it visits are actually pollinated. So um, now, most of our crop, and it's really important to the ag community, most of our crop pollination is done by the honeybee. Not entirely, but a lot of, and many crops are really reliant on honeybees, and they are experiencing a significant problem. But one thing also to think about honeybees is they're kind of a commodity in and of themselves. They're being bred and produced. So the population problems that are going on right now are really significant in the fact that it increases pollination cost for farmers to get those hives. We'll talk about that here in a second, but so it's important. Um, this is some 2024 data from the ag statistics, well, from the U.S. Department of Agriculture, value of pollination services. So basically, these beehives for hire really have serviced 1.7 million acres, and that total pollination value, is a little over $400 million. And of that $400 million, almonds basically account for 81% of those services. That's in 2024, pretty significant. And if you've ever seen an almond plantation, which I recently have for the first time there in Central Valley, it's no different than a soybean field or a cornfield here in the Midwest, meaning there's nothing growing there but the almonds. And they have to bring in these beehives, commercial beehives, and to pollinate. And they may have 20 hives stacked together in every quarter mile. And anyway, $181 a colony for rental, and that's three times more than for any other crop that they pay for. That's how dependent almonds are, and it can be up to 20%. I'm guessing even more now because that's 15-year-old data. 20% of their operation, and so when beehives decline, it's important to the ag community, and they're putting a lot of time and effort in to try to figure out, what's going on. But there's no doubt they're critically important to the to our agricultural sector. And if you want to get an example of how important, when the Sichuan province in China, these bees have declined, and the both their native bees, but the honeybees have declined to the point where they have to use manual labor to get reliable pollination of their apple trees. And pesticides is kind of what they attributed their issues there to. So just some common themes there. Uh, Honeybee habitat. Well, we know they need floral diversity, but from a natural standpoint, we basically manage their house in these hives here, and the managed nest that are within those hives, and so we're really looking at providing floral resource when it comes to honeybee habitat, and they need something in bloom all the time, nectar-rich plants. They prefer blue, yellow, and white flowers, and just having a good mix of perennials and annuals. And you'll see that common theme throughout all the pollinators, quite honestly. But really, it's providing that nectar, the nectar source for honeybees is the primary concern throughout the growing season. And of course, honeybees use non-native species much more than our native bees. And probably the two most common are we think about are red clover and sweet clover. Quite honestly, most of the honey we buy in the stores is clover honey. And so they're not as dependent upon the native plants as they are our native bees, but nonetheless, it is critically important because it provides that, because that's one of the concerns with honeybee populations, that all bee populations, particular honeybees, is or the floral resources are declining, and there's just not a reliable source, and long enough throughout the year. So some of the stress on the hives is creating some of the other issues that they have. So top flowers, native flowers for honeybees. You see, like a lot of times, we got the bee balms or wild bergamot, milkweeds, blazing stars, cone flowers. And one of the things to consider too is these four species down here, not by any means the only four, but just four common ones. They are very good early bloomers and critically important for bees particularly as queens and as a swarm and what have you. They need those sources earlier in the year. And don't forget the trees and shrubs like serviceberry, redbud. They tend to flower early, provide a very good nectar source. Among many other things as well. So our native trees and shrubs are important. Beyond honeybees, talk a little bit about native bees. You can see we've got over 4,000 species of native bees in North America, and a little over 1,400 of them that we have sufficient data on. Almost half of them are declining, and almost half of those are at risk for extinction. Now, of all the species, we were only got about 10% of those species here in Missouri, about 450 species, and tend to find more every year. Entomologists as they do surveys, 90% of those are solitary, which is unlike honeybees. Most of native bees are solitary, and they're really much more efficient as pollinators than honeybees are. A couple reasons for that. We'll get to here in a second, but a majority of our native bees, they don't sting, and like honeybees, but really with native bees, more flowers equals more bees, and I mean more bee species, because they are, like I said down here, 33% of some of the, about 33 or a third of our species, they specialize on just a few flowers. So if those flowers aren't there, if those species aren't there, those bees won't be there. Most of them are solitary again. They may fly for 5 weeks, forage, but they spend most of their time in a nest, developing, and in some species, maybe even more than a year. They don't nest far from their food source. And about 10% of our known bee species aren't named yet. So they've identified them as different, haven't named them yet. Um, and they're much more efficient pollinators in general. One thing is, though, with our native bees, the males really don't help out at all. So, and one thing that sets them apart from a honeybee, our native bees, is they've got specialized hair, many of the species, where they really efficiently collect pollen, and that allows them to more efficiently transfer that to to the next plant that they're at. So they're in it after the nectar, and they just get coated with pollen. It gets all over in their fur, in their hairs, not fur, in their hairs, and particularly on their legs and abdomen and what have you. And it very makes it very efficient. So really, most of the bees, native bees, are ground nesters, and I think a lot of people they don't. It's not something they think about, and it was kind of surprising to me that we've got about 30% are wood or tunnel nesters, and so that'd be like the carpenter bee there in the top photo. The ground nesters, a lot of times think of bumblebees. We've got sweat bees, cellophane bees, and digger bees. And these species, like the top right photo there with the dime, you can kind of see when I was, growing up, I always thought when I'd see holes in the ground like that, that it was ants. And it very well could have been, but it also could have been these digger bees or ground nesting bees. And, a lot of people don't think about that. Easy to overlook. But essentially, they'll have a single hole, a single shaft with several little offshoots, and they have a cell. And at the end of in those cells, they'll lay an egg, and the pollen, the food resource for those um, eggs to develop and eventually hatch. And as they develop into adults, and they crawl up out of there. And they're mostly solitary, meaning a single bee per hole, but there may be, I guess, maybe, dozens of them in a general area. Uh, Probably the most common that we think about as ground nesters is bumblebees. We have about 50 species now in North America, say almost a third, or declining in population, but probably most notably the rusty patch bumblebee is there on the right, and it's disappeared from 87% of its historic range, and as such it's listed as endangered. It's pretty amazing that how something can disappear from its historic range, you know to that level. Bumblebees, again, probably one of the more, along with monarchs, maybe one of the more thought of pollinators. They, again, native pollinator, but they're really important to our watermelons, blueberries, peppers, tomatoes, and strawberries, to our produce. Some of it is related to their buzz pollination, which means when they land on a plant and they're actively trying to get nectar, they vibrate their body, and that really shakes loose the pollen and helps them access nectar that may be difficult to get to otherwise. And so their whole body just gets coated with pollen depending on the plant. And they are active typically, maybe due to their larger body size, uh, active in cooler and cloudier conditions than honeybees. So they can actually be pollinating at times when honeybees aren't going to be active, just because of the conditions. Also, they're most notably, probably the native plant they're most notable on is bottle ginseng, and they're vitally important for pollination of those. Those flowers stay closed until they're seed till they pop for seed dispersal. But the bumblebee is strong enough, big enough, it's able to. It may take it several minutes, but it's able to climb up in there and actually push its way into the flower. Flower closes back up. The bee gets its nectar, pollen, and then pops back out. I don't. There's not many other bees that are able to do that, invertebrates, but bumblebee is good at it. They're also excellent pollinators for these other native species here, and as you see, that those are also very common as far as good nectar producers for all the other native bee species. They have a nest. They're considered, ground nesters, but they generally nest fairly shallow. And if you've ever come across a bumblebee nest, oftentimes it'll be like I said, under on the edges of old buildings, woodland edges, maybe under, a kind of a wallered out spot underneath uh, roots, tree roots, and what have you. But particularly around abandoned machinery, vehicles, it's undisturbed. There's places that they're sheltered, but they'll build that nest fairly shallow, and it's just a conglomeration of cells. And
You're
uh,
welcome. Have a
under
Merry
hay
Christmas.
under hay bales is another kind of spot that can really cause problems if you've ever come upon old hay bales when you're moving them. So very unique compared to maybe some of the other ground nesters. Um, the like I said, the wood and tunnel nesters make up about 30%, and those are your carpenter bees and the mason bees, and then leafcutter bees in general. So you see the carpenter bee here. They're a large bee, often mistaken for a honey or excuse me for a bumblebee, but there's other characteristics. But the easy way for me to tell is if they've got a shiny abdomen here, they generally they're a carpenter bee. Um, you can see they drill basically almost a perfect circle hole. They come in and then they excavate a cavity, and then you see these little cells where they placed the egg, and they'll use them year in and year out and expand them each year, which is one reason why they can be a problem on untreated wood, or wood that's not around buildings that's not kept stained or painted well. The mason bee, one of the things that I noticed very unique about them, they pollinate about 95% of the flowers that they visit, and these are the tunnel nesters. You've seen these bee nesting structures. They're that third photo from the left, basically like a series of straws packed together in various shapes. Um, and those need to be if you buy them or make those nesting structures for them, those nesting tubes need to be of natural material, not plastic or anything, but natural material, and at least 6 inches long. For some reason, that's a magic number. Otherwise, they'll nest in there, but they won't temperature regulation or something is not right. But essentially, they'll go in, they lay an egg, and then seal it off, lay another egg, seal it off, so on and so forth. And very unique in this aspect. But they'll also use old nail holes in fence posts and a whole variety of things. Those are just very easy to create. Here's a life cycle. You can see they emerge there in late March, pollinate and build nest, and then as you get the eggs in those tubes or in the holes that they've done, they hatch and develop. Then they spin a cocoon, and then they just sit there and pupate and overwinter as an adult until they emerge again and start the whole cycle over. Pretty amazing, really. And they not only will be in like a horizontal, hole in a tree or a fence post or these nesting structures, but some of these tunnel nesters, like this small carpenter bee, actually will use the stem of a plant, either a hollow plant. Or one with a pithy center that they can easily excavate, and then they're essentially doing that same process that the other mason bee that we showed does, just in basically upright stems. And a small carpenter bee, they're unlike the large carpenter bee. They don't actively, lay their nest in wood like a carpenter bee does, where they'll drill into a deck or siding. They're using pretty much all natural native habitat, if you will, plant stem material. And we got leaf cutter bees, and they're pretty unique. They'll seal off their chamber or even wrap their egg with the food source in a leaf, and so you can see if they've been present. You'll find these little half moon or almost circles cut out of the edge of leaves, and that's from a leaf cutter bee. And they use that in sealing off and protecting the egg and pupa as they lay their nest. And so, just some real unique adaptations that these species have. There's obviously many other specialist bees, and we won't be able to cover them all, but sunflower bee, longhorn thistle bee, we've got the alkali bee, which is in particular kind of specialized on alfalfa, particularly in the Southwest, squash bee. And so, um, as you can see, the pretty good pollinators of not only native, but also agronomically important species as well. Considerations for managing or having habitat for native bees is very similar to honeybees in the sense you need a diversity of plants, and in particular with native bees, more diversity of plants means particularly more species available. Uh, Leave plant stems standing through the winter because, like that small carpenter bee and many others, they'll use those dead and dying stems to lay their eggs, their young for the next year. They do need direct access to the soil, so they don't like a lot of leaf litter. So think of quail management if you're a quail person, or um, having some bare ground, not a lot of leaf litter in amongst the plant structure is important, and having that direct sunlight. So again, structure and diversity of the plant community and primarily native plant community is critical. And having some woody debris around the edges, edge feathering, brush piles, dead and dying trees left here and there. Is also important for some of those cavity nesters and tunnel nesting bees. Again, with some recommendations, consider that entire growing season if you're designing a seed mix, especially those early and late bloom periods. So April, May, and September and October. April and May is when we're getting the queens and they're coming out. They need an early food source or they'll die. And then any of the migrating species, particularly in the fall, that are using those nectar sources to fuel their migration, or a monarch, for instance. Um, and again, design a native seed mix with a lot of structural diversity, flower size, plant height, shape, and color. So diversity is kind of the name of the game, particularly, like I said, native diversity. Leave the stems is kind of a saying, and don't go in there in the fall, particularly. It's one thing if you got 50 acres planted and you need to do a little work here or there. But if you've got small plantings, and if there's any way, leave the stems because they provide excellent food source for a lot of species, birds in particular. But no, standing stems are good nest sites for a lot of the tunnel nesting bees and twig nesting bees. If you're in a place like, say, maybe you got an HOA or whatever, you need to do some clipping of it. Clip it off high, like in the picture on the right side. That's still, you need at least a foot, and it still leaves some area for the bees to lay their eggs and nest. Now, and by early summer, that'll all be covered up by fresh green growth. So maybe some way around that if you just got to cut something, but try to reduce the mowing. Now, this next picture, forgive the exotic species, the invasive that's in there. So, but I included this picture because I think it tells a good story. And those overwintering stems and overwintering vegetation, particularly of diverse native plantings, um, they hold bees, like we talked about, seed head, and seed for birds. Leaf litter is good for developing chrysalis for many of our species, moths and butterfly species, and again the nest site. So vitally important. There is a coneflower in there, so um, I noticed that coneflower first, and why I chose the picture, and then I noticed the teasel in there, and so not at all promoting that. So native plants versus exotic ornamentals when you're thinking about plantings, not just for bees, but for everything. Our wildlife, America's wildlife didn't evolve with exotic plants, like Bradford pear, burning bush, honeysuckle. And, you know, most of our exotic using tree species as an example here, most of our exotic tree species, they don't house and they're not hosts for very many beneficial insects in their larvae, whereas our native plants, ashes, cherries, willows, and particularly oaks, um, they may house oaks may have be a food source and a home to well over 500 caterpillar species, and we know how important that is to feeding young birds, as we talked about earlier. And migrating songbirds, when they're feeding, they use fuel, obviously, to fuel their fat to fuel their migration. And I don't think, at least in the study I looked at, no invasive shrub fruit had higher than 1% fat, while almost all of our natives range from 6 to 48%. So much more efficient, much better. And there's actually, one invasive that's killing berry eating songbirds. And I just actually discovered this recently, and this is the cedar waxwings, and they're feeding on, um, oh, good Lord, the bamboo. It just escaped me. Heavenly bamboo is a common name, and these fruits, if they're consumed too many at one time, they release cyanide when they digest. And if the waxwings eat too many of them, they are not able to detoxify, and it kills them. And if you know anything about cedar waxwing, when they're migrating and they find a food source that they like, uh, there's hundreds of them, and so that's not a good thing. This is just a chart kind of showing, looking at, if you look at goldenrod there on the right for herbaceous plants, they may be host and support, well over 100 native species of inverts, moths and butterflies in particular. Oak tree, we mentioned earlier, over 500. And again, you won't find hardly any exotic species that's common that we plant that will have more than 10. And so they're it really disrupts our um, kind of our food chain. And when we think about it, our natural food web, the ecological food web, by planting these exotics. So native flowers and shrubs for bees, native bees, very similar to the other that we looked at. You've got bergamots and milkweeds and blazing star and coneflowers. But again, don't overlook the trees and shrubs, blackberries, willow, maple, ash, if you have any left, oak trees in particular, um, the red buds and plums. They're all very, very important. And as you'll see later, there's some butterfly species that will only basically have larval stages on some of our native shrubs and trees. So now to butterflies. Got over 700 species in North America. Say 20% of them are at risk. Recent study this year showed, just in the last 20 years, at least 2000 to 2020, of the 554 species that they recorded, 22% decline from 2000 to 2020. So a fifth of them are gone in 20 years overall abundance. And um, North America has just a fraction of the overall species worldwide. You can see how many we've got. Not near as many as the beetle species, but very, very diverse taxonomic group. Um, Monarch butterfly, again, probably the most thought of butterfly when we think of butterflies. They've had an 80% population decline in the last 25 years. They were petitioned for listing in 2020, or excuse me, 2014. Fish and Wildlife Service said that their listing was warranted as threatened, I believe, at the time. But there were other priorities that precluded that listing. And of course, really a concerted effort since 2014 to manage for monarch populations, and probably one of the things that that enabled them to at least still be as numerous as they are, relatively speaking, is that effort over the last decade. Um, their listing, they were listed as threatened and under review, and that listing is still pending. I wouldn't hold your breath. It may be a while before they before they actually finalize that status of the monarch. But regardless of the formal status, they are hurting and need our help, much like many other species. Monarchs are pretty unique. There are many species that show evidence of migration, but we really only know of two, or I should say, the entomologists that really only know of two that I'm aware of that are definite migrators, and that's the cloudless sulfur, and then you got the monarch. But the monarch stands out by far in terms of the overall distance that they migrate from their northeastern, range in the summer to their roost location in central Mexico. At least the eastern population is, roughly 3,000 miles, and so it's amazing that they make it. Their last generation, they call the super generation, they can live 6 to 9 months, whereas all the other generations are, living 5 to 6 weeks. So it's just this genetic miracle. The only way I can describe it. But that's the migration of the monarch. And so they're just like bees or both honeybees and native bees. They need nectar sources, so a lot of flowers. They need overwintering habitat for their larvae. So honeybees, they make their own habitat. I mean, they have the honeycombs and they provide the honey for the developing um, larvae. And the one thing, and same with the native bees. The one thing that's different, really, with the butterflies is they they have this larval food source that the larvae are on their own. They got to fend for themselves. And so, I'll give you an example of just um, well, first we'll talk about some top nectar sources for butterflies. Again, uh, thistles, goldenrods, bergamot or bee balm, um, sunflowers, milkweed, very, very critical for all these things for butterflies. And some common butterflies, they're definitely, you can argue one more common than the other, or there's another one, but these are just, five, six common species I picked out. We'll look at their kind of their larval host. Um, if you look at the great spangled fritillary, their host plant is violets and violets only for the most part. So what I mean by sets them apart from bees is so they'll depending on the time of the year, but for the most part, late summer, early fall, they're laying their eggs, or when they lay their eggs, depending on the species, they're laying it either on the host plant or near the host plant, and then that larvae hatches, and then they're feeding on that plant. If they can't find that plant nearby, then they don't live, and they're on their own from that point on. A common buckeye is wild petunias, plankton, snapdragon family. So obviously there's some exotic species in there, or introduced species at least. Um, but but those are their larval food sources for those two. Pearl crescent, primarily their host plant are asters. And so those are in the fall. Like I said, if they're not present, the adult's going to lay them closer on, but they need those present and they feed off of those plants. And if they're not there or in low numbers, it doesn't look good, at least for that local population. Eastern tiger swallowtail, I can't see it from the you got ash, oak, willow, cottonwood. So this is a species that relies primarily on our tree species. Black swallowtail, golden alexanders, Queen Anne's lace, an exotic, kind of a naturalized species, carrot family. So it will do okay on some exotic herbs, if you will, or introduced herbs. You've got the red spotted purple, once again, black cherry, willow, poplars, oaks. And so it's one that relies on our native trees and shrubs. Don't forget the native trees and shrubs when you're thinking about pollinators. Um, Monarchs and milkweed, again, probably that most commonly thought of um, host larval interaction. They rely specifically on milkweeds and milkweeds only, and it vitally important. They won't be there without the milkweed. Regal flitterary butterfly. It relies primarily on native remnant prairie, and its host plant is sole host plant is violets. Here, mainly prairie violets, but the other native violets as well. And if you don't have those violets present on your prairie, you won't have regal flitterarias there. You might see them foraging on an area, but and if you don't have any violets there, they they weren't produced on that prairie, so it had to be someplace nearby. So these are chrysalis, and the most common one is the monarch. You notice typically most people, but all these others are chrysalises of other butterflies, and they form. They're not a cocoon. They're actually it's the own um, outer shell of a shedding butterfly as it's developing. So it's actually part of the butterfly that is morphed, may not be the correct technical term, but morphed into being this outer shell. And then inside, the butterfly is developing. And many of them will overwinter in leaf litter. And that's why we always talk about not only leave the stems, we talked about earlier, but leave the leaves. Because many of these chrysalises and cocoons from moths, they actually have cocoons, and things like fireflies, which may take in some cases up to 2 years of developing in a leaf litter. They need that leaf litter to survive and complete their life cycle. And of course, it's beneficial to birds as well. As kind of depicted there in this graph. So once again, if you're in an area where you've got just a um, you need to tidy it up to try to make it look somewhat uniform and leave some areas that aren't all manicured and sucked up all the leaves and bagged them and hauled them off. Um, some differences or some common things between butterflies and bees, and about getting to the end here, is both need landing places. They're not like hummingbirds where they can hover. So good floral diversity, uh, the monarch butterfly, but butterflies in general have longer tongues than bees do, so that changes the resources that they have access to. They don't see in the same color range. Butterflies have a wider spectrum, and it includes the UV. And butterflies attracted to really all types of flowers, and bees are more attracted to the flowers in the blue, yellow, and white ranges, and they seem to avoid red flowers. Now, butterflies love that, but doesn't mean you shouldn't plant things like cardinal flower. It just means don't expect to see bees hovering all over them. So, what are some good things conservation wise in the big picture, for native pollinators in particular? Well, one, a common theme is you establish native habitat. Okay, and it can be in the form of right-of-way plantings, whole field plantings, just plantings around a tenth of an acre around your house and in the backyard, whatever. And it could even, this one picture, it's hard to see, but they're just big potted plants, and have a series of them on your patio with a diverse mix. That can even provide some habitat for certain species of pollinators that otherwise wouldn't even be there. Reduce pesticide usage, and if for some reason you've got to use it at a time when it's not affecting or overspraying on floral resources that you may have. Leave the leaves and stems, as we talked about. And then the other thing that's probably as important, you got to educate people. If they don't see the value, people don't see the value in something, they're not going to take the time to learn more about it or try to conserve it. So educate, educate, educate. Some maybe more specific actions for pollinators. Again, establish native plantings, grass, but heavy on the forbs. Don't forget the trees and native shrubs. More flowers equals more bees equals better. Something in bloom at all the time, all the time. So um, don't forget those early blooming species, April, May, and the late bloomers in September and October. If you're burning, which is an excellent practice, don't burn it all at once, those fields all at once. Try to do a third to a half. Dormant season burns are the best, and they encourage forbs and suppress the grass. If you don't really have much any bare ground and need some, you can do light disking. The burning helps too. But if you can't, control cool season grasses and those exotics. This is when chemicals come into play. I try not to use a lot of it, but in some cases you just can't avoid it. And um, things like brush pile, edge feathering, having that woody debris for those tunnel nesting bees and that we talked about earlier is vitally important. So really, it kind of breaks down. It's about native plant structure and diversity. Especially for native bees, the more structural diversity and the more floral diversity equals more bees and more insects overall, which really fuels our entire food chain, if you will. So with that, there's some informational resources. You just get online and Google, Pheasants Forever, and that says, Quail Forever, Department of Conservation. Xerces Society is uh, got a lot of resources. All of the federal sites, um, you know, a lot of unique resources and really a lot of financial assistance out there, which probably some other speakers will talk about. If you're wanting to do some of these practices, even at an urban setting, there may be some assistance there, but it's critically important. You can do some small actions, particularly for pollinators, and have a large impact. We're about 50 minutes, so I leave about 5 or 10 minutes for questions, if you have any. But with that, I'm done and turn it over back to Bill.
Okay, thank you, David. Any questions for David before we move on? You'll have to unmute your microphone if you want to ask a question. And there's no questions in the chat. Okay, Rachel, would you want to share your screen?
Sure will. Give me just a second. Pull this up here. Let me try to full screen this here. Wrong one. Hold on a second. I'm not as familiar with the
Zoom. Yeah.
the Zoom. Yeah, so I apologize there. Hold on a second. I guess the best way to do it, maybe this and that. Or you still
David,
see my?
I cannot see it yet. But for David, we do have a question in the chat.
Yeah, go ahead.
What species do you recommend for early spring?
There's a handful. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. Golden Alexander is one. Um, some of the more common and maybe readily available, blue wild indigo is another. Of course, any of the violets, if you're able to get those. And just thinking, not only blue wild indigo, but also white wild indigo. White prairie clover is a little later than golden Alexander typically, but those are all good species. And most of the seed vendors, if you look them up, which I hesitate to name one or two because I'll forget a bunch, is that they'll have a list of species, and generally they usually have a bloom table, a bloom, and gives you a good idea of when they're blooming. But that's why some of those native shrubs are good once they become established. Plum and redbud, serviceberry, they'll bloom early too, and they tend not to get too tall. So,
Okay. Thank you, David.
yeah.
Our next speaker is Rachel Settle. She is an area biologist with the Missouri Department of Conservation and is assigned to the NRCS area staff in Area 3 down in Jackson, Missouri. So, Rachel, I'll let you take it away. And I can see your screen now.
All right. Can you hear me all right?
Yes.
All right, perfect. So thanks all for joining in today. I'm really excited to give this presentation. I actually had a field training last week that dealt with site prep and establishing these types of plantings. So the timing worked out perfectly here. As Bill said, I'm the area biologist. I'm actually out of Farmington now, but still in the southeast region of the state. So most of the work that I do is with private landowners and assisting our PLCs and partner staff with training on many of the private land programs that come out of the federal farm bill. Taking a little bit. All right, there we go. All right, so site prep is probably the most important factor when you're talking about establishing successful pollinator plantings. You really can't expect good results without good site prep. My presentation here, I'm going to be talking about assessing your fields for planting, what the planting methods and dates are as they apply to NRCS programming, because that's what I work with for the most part. Some different types of commonly used planting equipment, and then discuss a little bit about first year establishment. Jeff will be following my presentation for long-term management of these kinds of plantings, so I'll leave that all to him. So in general, there are a few things that you want to consider for your planting. What is the ecological site? If your goal is ecological restoration, as in the case of this pictured sand prairie here, we really want to plant species that are of that ecological community. What is endemic to that site? You should also consider utilizing yellow tag seed or seed that has been sourced as closely to your site as possible. And sometimes that's not always available and will cost more, but if true restoration is your goal, then you want to try and get as much yellow tag seed as possible. Second is prescribed burning an option for the area. This is a really good consideration for both your site prep and your long-term management. Make sure that you're going to burn with an approved burn plan, that you have the proper training, and if you need a burn plan written for you, you'll want to make sure that you have extra time available for someone locally to develop that plan for you. Next, what kind of equipment is available for planting? If you don't own any equipment, you might check with your local soil and water conservation districts, your local PLC, your local co-ops to see what types of spraying and planting equipment is available for you to rent or loan. And that varies across the state, depending, which area you are. And so I know with a lot of our PLCs, we might be able to move equipment around and accommodate you as long as we have some adequate time to prepare for moving equipment around. Lastly, be sure that if you're involved with the cost share program, that you're planting and buying seed that meets the specifications of that program. A wildflower planting can have different species or planting requirements that vary from program to program. You may be working with the USDA program, but depending on which one you're actually contracted through, you want to be sure that you are planting within the specs of that particular program. Right, so as I mentioned, most of the work that I do with private land is through the Farm Bill programs, and a lot of the references that I'm going to be giving today are the standards that are used in Missouri NRCS. They can all be accessed on the NRCS online field office technical guide. You just go to this website, you can put it in a search engine, field office technical guide NRCS. You pull up your state and it will generate lots of different helpful information. Section 4 here, that's where the practice standards and supporting documents are. You can find all kinds of helpful information in there, such as this Monarch habitat guidance document. There's also a native forb guidance document that discusses a lot of the in-depth site preparation methods that I'm going to talk about today. So your proper field assessment is needed to develop a conversion plan for your planting. You need to take a look out there. What's your current cover type? Because whether you're going from crop, sod, or an old field, you need to make sure that you have a plan that is specific for that particular conversion. Row crop sites generally require fewer site prep and herbicide applications than herbaceous cover sites. For your herbaceous cover sites, you want to ask yourself, is it primarily grass or a mix of grass and broadleaf species? Are the grasses warm or cool season? Are they a mix of both? Could there be desirable existing warm season grasses that might be suitable for more of an interseeding situation than a full conversion? I also want to make sure that there aren't any invasive species present. The number one killer I see in these plantings is Sericea lespedeza. It requires very timely and multiple herbicide applications for effective control. If at all possible, delay your planting.
That's annoying.
Got some feedback on here. Make sure you mute your microphone. Make sure that you have enough time for these difficult to control species like Sericea. If you can delay your planting for a year, that to enable yourself to get a better control on that, I highly recommend that. The other thing about Sericea is the effective herbicides used for treating Sericea will also negatively impact your forbs. And so, the goal there is, at least if you get it down to a spot spray level, you can do, more application follow-up as needed. But if you've got a whole field that is, 50% or more Sericea, it's worth delaying that planting a year or so and make sure you get a really good handle on that. Johnson grass is another problematic invasive that I see, in particular in my area, the old pasture conversions. If you're planning on including native warm season grasses in your seed mix, it can be difficult to target the Johnson grass and not impact your native warm season grasses. So elimination of invasives really takes time, and your goal, again, at a minimum, should be to knock them back to a spot spraying level. Always consider your invasives and understand that there may be follow-up treatments as needed, even after your planting is established and it progresses. Woody encroachment is another consideration that can really dictate your site preparation, as you may need to conduct some mechanical and chemical methods of control. Something else you might consider asking yourself is there a history of herbicide applications in the area to be planted? This in particular in crop field situations, there could be residual herbicides in the soil that could impact the growth of some of the forbs. I've also talked to a couple of seed vendors, and they have some trials that have showed that repeated broadleaf herbicides over a long term, we're talking about decades or more, could potentially impact how many forb species you see in the first few growing seasons. Lastly, you want to consider the size, layout, and the accessibility of the planting area, because that can really limit the field equipment that you're going to be able to use. So, if you have a smaller field, you might only, need a ATV, a UTV, or maybe you can hand broadcast it if you got something that a tractor couldn't fit into. So what's in your mix? Generally, we tend to plant these in terms of seeds per square foot, and that ranges anywhere between 15 to 40 pure life seeds per square foot. These forbs are, the seeds are very different in their sizes and shapes, and so 5 pounds per acre of one mix may not be 5 pounds per acre in another mix. So that's why we generally design these in pure life seed, or seeds per square foot, sorry. As Dave mentioned, diversity is key. A good rule of thumb here is to include at least 20 native species with multiple species in each bloom season. The goal for monarch and pollinator habitat should really be to make sure that field is usable from early spring until late fall, particularly even for those migrating monarchs. We want to provide as much fuels as possible for their long migrations. And David also mentioned, obviously, milkweed is needed for monarchs, and we'll talk a little bit about some more monarch specs here in a little bit. But nectarine plants are also very important. I also want to emphasize that diversity should be in the structure of the plants as well. David also touched on this. More diversity, more plant structure means that we're going to have a lot more available plants for those pollinators that are highly specialized and may rely on specific plants. I like to recommend some short growing native warm season grasses for quail, nesting, and stem nesting bee habitat opportunities. Adding grasses can also help carry prescribed burn effectively for long-term management. And if the field has rank warm season grasses or is an old pasture that's primarily broom sedge, I don't typically add in as many, if any, grasses, because those can be treated as interseeding situations. So that's a very common conversion that we have in my area in the southeast. So these old pasture fields that have had repeated hayings and they have a lot of broom sedge, and typically a couple applications doesn't quite kill that out. And so we already have some of the grass there to provide some diversity. The amount of grasses that you put in this could vary with our NRCS programs. They range anywhere between, you may only be able to include a maximum of 25%, or there's some nesting cover that go up as high as 40 to 50%. Grasses are also a good idea to include if you have erosion as a concern, and you want to go a little bit higher on your seeds per square foot to assist with that erosion control. You might also consider a cover crop, and I've worked with some seed vendors that will actually include some cover crop in your mix if that's something that your program allows for. Typically, these are like oats or cereal rye sometimes, but you need to make sure that those are mowed down and effectively terminated prior to your seedling emergence so that they don't have that competition to deal with. All right, so be sure that your seed is as locally sourced and grown as possible. USDA programs require specific seed source geography, and so this is our seed source geography eligible counties for Missouri that we can source seed out of. The wildlife habitat implementation requirement sheet actually has each of these counties listed. If you need some more information on that. And I'll stress that, I know that there may be some people on here from other states, and there are really good seed vendors all across the country. And some of them could market into our state, and it's okay to utilize out-of-state seed vendors, but I would just caution to make sure that they do meet the seed source geography requirements if you are needing to meet that for program eligibility. Some of our Monarch specifications and our programs require a specific amount of milkweed percentage for Monarch practices. That's a minimum of 3%. You can always do more than that. And of course, obviously, the forbs that are very important for monarchs. So we have this statement: 60% of forbs from table 1, and what that table 1 is these approved forbs here that have high or very high monarch value. And so 60% of your seed mix must come from the forbs on this table here. And this is just a snippet of one of the pages. The Monarch Habitat Guidance document that I presented at the beginning of this presentation actually has the complete list. And again, I can't stress this enough, that we're trying to fuel the migration here, and we're trying to provide as much milkweed as possible, as that is their host plant. All right, getting into a little bit more the site preparation details here. I'm really not going to go into depth on organic site preparation here, but I want to let you know this resource that's available through Xerces Society. If you're interested in doing some kind of an organic site preparation, I would encourage you to reference this very thorough guide and use it as you deem necessary. Seed for pollinator planting should really be planted in the dormant season for the best results, as many of our native orb species are going to require anywhere from that 30 to 90 days of cold, moist stratification in order to germinate. I advise landowners that I work with to get their seed in the ground in December or January, if at all possible, especially if we end up having a short winter. Those later seeding dates, we may not get the cold, moist stratification that some of those forbs need in order to germinate. Looking at this table here, in the dormant season, you can broadcast or drill. These are the dates that we have for northern and southern Missouri. Spring planting, broadcast is not recommended here. Drilling is recommended. And again, the dates for northern and southern Missouri are listed here. In our CS specs, you can utilize drilling or broadcasting in that dormant period. And if you're curious where that division is on the northern and southern Missouri, this is what the NRCS specs are for that. All right, so looking at the conversion here, your conversion plan really depends on what your current cover type is, but overall there's some common things here. Your goal is to have at least 50% or more bare ground. The more, the better. That's going to make sure that we have really good seed to soil contact here. The seed bed needs to be firm. If general rule of thumb, if you walk through the field and you can just barely see your boot print, that's pretty good. But if your boot is really sinking into the dirt and you got pretty extensive a footprint there, I would say, I don't know, more than an inch or up to an inch. I mean, that's kind of not really as firm as what we want it to be. And so really cultipack or roll that, or maybe let it rest and get a good rain and freezing, and maybe that'll help firm it up if you don't have that equipment available to you. Broadcasting is going to require more bare ground than drilling. Generally, we do not require fertilizer in these programs for these types of plantings. It's not generally recommended, as I have seen. Fertilizer could promote the growth of annual weeds that we don't want to have that kind of competition with our native seedlings. And then carrier such as pelleted lime, rice hulls, cat litter is needed for broadcasting. It's also needed for some drilling situations as well. But for sure, if you're going to be broadcasting, you want to make sure that you have some kind of a carrier to allow for even distribution. When I talk about bare ground, this picture is a pretty good example of that right there. It's a pretty firm seed bed, so you can't really see much of the tractor tires or anything in that. So if you're in a crop situation, this is really the ideal and easiest site prep method. You'll want to ensure that the remaining crop residue isn't too thick to ensure good seed to soil contact. It might not be necessary to carry a fire through that, so mechanical removal means might be necessary for you to achieve that. Be sure to check for large gullies or eroded areas, and if needed, you might want to lightly disc those to fix those areas. Anytime you disc, though, I'm going to recommend that you cultipack the disturbed soil again to create that firm seed bed. Crop site prep is easy because as long as you have that residual under control, pretty easy to drill or broadcast right into that stubble. And you might need a late fall application to assist in controlling some winter annuals. But again, monitor your field and make any kind of revisions to your conversion plan as you deem necessary. Cool season site prep is generally going to be needing at least 2 herbicide applications. Ideally, you can mow in the spring and allow regrowth anywhere from about 8 to 10 or 12 inches, apply broad spectrum herbicides such as glyphosate on that, and then follow up again in the fall. If you're only, for whatever reason, available to spray in the fall, make sure your 2 fall sprayings have at least 4 weeks in between applications. But you also might ask yourself if the field can be hayed. So remember that our goal here for good site prep is to remove as much competing vegetation as possible, open up as much bare ground as possible. If cropping is an option, you might consider that as well. Delay the planting a year if that works with your timeline. Make sure that you're going to keep your invasives in check, scout for things such as Sericea lespedeza, and remember that the optimal timing of Sericea lespedeza herbicide application is in the summer, so be ready to spray in June or July. Lastly, these plantings or these conversions typically have a lot of dead thatch material left over, and prescribed burning is a great way to open up bare ground for good seed to soil contact. All right, so warm season grass site prep conversions, that really depends on, if you have a desirable native grass or you've got some rank stands of native grass. And generally here, you're not going for total elimination. You're wanting to utilize some of those native grasses for your benefit, your planting. So we're aiming at more of a suppression application here. Herbicide applications in the summer and early fall are very effective on that. They also have quite a bit of thatch left over. So at all possible, you might want to burn with your burn plan to get that off the ground. And then you might have follow-up grass selective herbicide application in the future if you see that it didn't suppress that grass as much as you wanted it to. But when we're talking about warm season grasses, we're really trying to make sure that we stress them out right before they go dormant. So aiming into that late summer, early fall, August time period, any way that we can stress them out, but not completely eliminate them is really the goal here. I put this together for my training attendees last week and wanted to share this with you all. I could really get into a complete presentation on herbicide application that's utilized for site prep, but these are ones that I see are used most often, and not trying to promote any brand names over here, but these are really what's commonly available to utilize in these situations. My go-to is using a combination of glyphosate, a non-ionic surfactant, and ammonium sulfate. That ammonium sulfate is really a water conditioner. It helps out in my area. We've got really hard water in this area. Really increases the efficacy of the herbicide application. The non-ionic surfactant really helps alter the surface tension of the herbicide, so we can get that mix to penetrate through a waxy layer of some of the hard-to-kill plant species. If you're using ammonium sulfate and your tank does not have an agitator, I would recommend you utilize the liquid form of that. The granular form, just kind of sits at the bottom of the tank if it's not mixed in properly. So agitator is really helpful in that case. You can also add plateau at certain rates depending on what species are planted. I find that I like to include that in my mixes in the fall. And that imazapic, brand names of plateau or panoramic, that can be used as a pre-emergent, post-emergent. Keep in mind that it has a maximum application rate of 12 ounces per acre per year. And so in my fall applications, I typically recommend no more than 6. It should be noted that we do have some forbs that are tolerant to imazapic, and I really encourage you to check the label for these because there are different tolerance rates for different species. They can range anywhere from 2 to 6 or 8%. So really take a look at that label, and you can get a pretty well imazapic tolerant forb mix. They are quite expensive. If you're needing to meet program requirements, it might be a little bit more difficult for the vendor to put that mix together, but I have had landowners that were able to get imazapic tolerant forb mixes. Clethodim, it's a grass-specific herbicide, really helpful in early spring if you don't get your fescue completely under control. This could also be helpful in warm season grasses as well. Pasture guard, that triclopyr, fluroxapyr, used to control Sericea lespedeza. Keep in mind those really need to be targeted timely in the summer for proper control. I don't typically go for 2,4-D recommendation, but sometimes it's needed for really hard to control broadleaves such as sweet clover, white clover, cockleburs, and some of the woody species that need to be controlled prior to planting. And then sulfuron or outrider, that's an effective herbicide for treating Johnson grass, cheatgrass, winter annuals, and some of the bromes. So I just wanted to show a side-by-side picture of what imazapic application can do here. Again, you want to check the label for the rates of the forbs and see what their tolerance levels are and when you should apply that. Keep in mind that maximum 12 ounces per acre per year. But you can see it, imazapic is really helpful, especially native forage plantings, in getting successful suppression of competition here. I did want to touch on this because I feel like I've been getting this question a lot more lately, and really disking for site prep. My professional opinion, I try to not disturb the soil as much as possible. But with people that are interested in a more organic site prep approach, this is an option for them as long as they do this very diligently. But there are a lot of times that I do not recommend disking for site prep. And that's if they're going to use that as a standalone practice. If they do, they should have multiple disking events across each of the growing season to get that vegetation completely suppressed. I really do not recommend this if invasive species like Sericea are of a concern. And you're just going to stir up that seabed. And again, the approach and the thought process of utilizing an organic site prep is to not use herbicides. But when you get something like Sericea in there, if it's not eradicated, you're going to end up utilizing some herbicide likely in the long run to get that under control. I don't recommend this on steep slopes just because of the erosion concern. Talk about, I don't know, about 5% or greater slopes. Be very, very cautious. If you don't have a roller or cultipacker at your disposal to utilize to firm up that seed bed, I really don't recommend it unless you can allow for several weeks and maybe a month or two of precipitation events for the soil to really pack that down and firm up that seed bed prior to planting. Again, when you walk across this, you should be able to barely see your boot print. The Monarch habitat guidance document that I provided earlier, as well as the native forb guidance document, will both summarize a lot of these blanketed recommendations, but they are just that. They are just blanketed recommendations, and every site is different. You can't always account for external variables such as drought and bad fire weather. We found this out on some demonstration projects that we completed last week on public land. And we were looking at applying herbicide multiple times and went for our second application, and we were in the middle of a drought, and we were kind of questioning ourselves, is this really worth it to apply herbicide right now? Because a lot of these plants are looking like they're dormant, they're already stressed out. We didn't want to waste the herbicide, so we opted out of that. Another thing is bad fire weather. You got to make sure that you're burning with your burn plan. And if you're wanting to utilize prescribed burning as part of your site prep, that's something that you want to make sure that you plan well ahead of time. I think, a lot of times, as planners, we can get really busy and maybe not do our field assessments as thoroughly. We've got a lot on our plate, and that's understandable, but really scout these fields. And if you're a landowner, scout them early and often so that you can really come up with a plan that is catered to converting into a successful monarch or pollinator planting. All right, looking at some of the equipment that is utilized for planting these, and we're going to start with some of the broadcasting. This is a Vicon pendulum spreader. It's a very popular one to utilize in these native forb situations because they're really customizable and across different forb mixes. And so this one is one that's available for rent from a local soil and water conservation district office, and it comes on a trailer. You back your tractor up to it, and you can connect it there, and then it has this little tube at the base of it of this hopper here. The forb seed is kind of funneled down, and then this slings back and forth to broadcast the seed. And you can see right here, this is the handle. It opens and closes that hopper. And that hopper has an adjuster knob, which is right here. And you can utilize that to twist this white knob here. It has all these different setting increments to plant all kinds of different types of seed depending on the size of your seed, really. And for our planting purposes, we did 2 different forb plantings last week, and we found ourselves going in between the 12 setting and the 18 setting. They were both forb mixes, but some seed was a little bit bigger in size, and it was having trouble getting through the hopper. But calibration of these is very important. And so to make sure that you're getting your targeted seeds per square foot, what we did is we kind of laid down some drop cloth and put the broadcast seeder over it, looked at how it was spreading out seed, and adjusted that knob to our liking. Looking inside that hopper, it's got these little agitator in here. This is not a whole lot of seed, but if I recall correctly, I think this is only about like an acre of seed, or half acre, one of the two. And so it's not a lot of seed, and it is very small. And because it's very small, that's the size of the hopper opening. It wasn't open any more than a quarter at any given time. In that picture on the right there, you can see some of these little clumped up granules there, and that's the pelleted lime that we had in there. And we found a good ratio was, one for one part carrier pelleted lime and 1 part seed. And so we were pretty good with that mix, and it was, able to get us our distribution, our goal seed per square foot seeding rate that we wanted to. If you are hand broadcasting out of buckets, I would advise you to increase that, maybe a 3 parts carrier to 1 part seed. And again, this is what the seed mix looks like. This was our high diversity, 50 species was in this mix on the left. And on the right, that was our monarch seeding that had about 30 species in it. But we had already added the carrier in that. So again, that's the pelletized lime. That's what it looks like whenever you mix it up there. So again, these Vicon pendulum spreaders, not to promote this brand over any other, but again, it's something that is readily available. I feel like in my area, at least, it's very popular because you can control and adjust that and calibrate it just to your liking based on your seed mix, as we saw, even working with 2 different native forb mixes. I took a video last week that I thought would be really helpful to show you guys how this works here. And so he's pulling this behind the tractor there, and that tube is just slinging the seed on our planting area there. I would advise that if you are broadcasting this kind of seed in the snow, this particular planter came with a cover that you could put over the hopper, but if you don't have that available, I would put a tarp and maybe a ratchet strap or bungee strap it over your hopper so that seed doesn't get wet, because then you're really going to have an issue trying to feed that through your hopper and meet your seeding rate. So another option, one that is really easy for landowners if they don't have a lot of large equipment at their disposal. This is a Truax seed slinger, and it's an ATV mounted seed slinger. It has an auger, agitator, and picker wheels here to help distribute the fluffy seeds that are within these forb mixes here. And so similar to the Vicon, there's a slide gate on it that can be adjusted, that can control the flow of the rate of the seed that's coming out. And this particular model has a 10-inch disc on it that slings the seed evenly. You can see it kind of has these different sections. It's got like fan blades here that throw the seed uniformly toward the ground. They also have a handheld version of this that has a wearable shoulder strap. You can operate that by just walking and cranking the handle on it. It also has the agitator and picker wheels that can be adjusted for the appropriate seed flow. So those might be ideal for smaller field situations. This is an example of a typical rotary seed spreader that can be fixed to the back of the ATV or UTV. Some models have an agitator and some don't. I find it helpful that you have the agitator to help disperse the seed evenly, especially because the different weights between like the lime and the different forb seeds. This particular model here is one that we used to plant last week, and it did not have an agitator in it, which made it a little bit difficult to disperse seed compared to the Vicon, but it has the similar kind of concept where there are two small openings that can be adjusted depending on the seed size. The seed flows through, it's all gravity fed, flows through the container, and then it has those disc fans at the bottom here that seeds the seed out in every direction. The mounting height here is really important to make sure that the seed doesn't spread onto the back of the UTV. We didn't have this part last week, and so we were kind of mounting it back up here, and what we found was obviously it spreads in all directions, and so we got a lot in the back there, but we went out and had the backpack blower in the middle of the field and kind of dispersed some of that seed out. There's an electrical switch on here. It turns the hopper or the seeder on and off, but it does not turn the hopper on and off. The hopper is hand activated from a lever right over here. And so just warning, you might turn that off, but your seed, if you still have some remaining, it's going to be spilling out. So it's really helpful if you have a second person that can control your hopper handle. All right, then we have a no-till drill. So the standard grain drills are typically not designed to handle native forb seed. There are specific drills designed to handle native forb plantings, but make certain that you can control the depth that the drill places a seed onto the ground, and the shallower that you can get, the better. Some of the seeders, such as the Brilliant, they drop the seed on the ground and then press it down with rollers. These can be really ideal if you have a good clean seed bed. If you're only planting forb seed in a drill, you want to make sure that you have a carrier like the lime in order to get the proper application rate. And it kind of depends on your forb seed. If you've got something that's a little bit more round and smooth, mix it with a carrier. And if your drill has a lagoon box, you can put it on the drill mat. If the seed is more fluffy, you can mix it in with a carrier and place it in the seed box that has an agitator with the picker wheels. But regardless, make sure that you calibrate your drill to ensure your proper seed slot openings are used, and we have the appropriate seeding rate. You want to make sure that you can get out, look back, and see some of that seed on the surface. Drills are beneficial because they can handle less bare ground compared to broadcasting planting. So in those situations where you might have a little bit of crop residue after you've harvested, these are great for that. I also find that Drilled rows make planting evaluations a lot easier because you can just walk down the row and count and identify your seedlings a lot easier as opposed to if it was broadcasted. All right, so chain harrow here. These are great when you do have thatch or crop residue. They just disturb the soil a little bit, slightly enough to expose a little bit more bare ground. Obviously not recommended to drag when the soil is wet, and you may want to follow up with a roller or cultipacker to firm the seed bed up prior to planting. What I like about these is you can, put this the other way and make the tines up, and so you're just kind of just a little bit of soil disturbance, not too much. You're not like you're disking it. But this is a situation that we had in one of our plantings last week. We had a lot of warm season grass thatch left over, and the chain was drug across it a couple times, and you can see it is balling up here. Not that this was, not enough bare ground, but it was just a little bit too much thatch for my liking. And so even though it balled up here, we were able to kind of rake and blow these into piles and burn that off. So that is an option. And again, cultipacker roller come in different shapes and sizes. You can get tractors or UTV mounted ones. Really good to make sure you have a firm seed bed. They can be used after the planting to make sure that we have really good seed pressed into the ground, good seed to soil contact. Again, make sure that the ground is not wet before you use this, because again, you don't want to push that seed too deep. But if snow is forecasted immediately afterwards, you can forego this cultipacker, because the best planting conditions would be to broadcast while it's snowing. You can check your seeding right behind you in the blanket of snow, and you get that nice freezing and thawing. And this is just what it looks like after you've rolled your fields out. All right, so you've planted now. What do you need to do in the first year? If you're seeing some of the cool season grasses coming up like fescue, you might want to apply grass selective herbicide in the spring. Native warm season grasses are in your mix. Make sure that you apply it early enough not to impact them. You want to make sure that you reduce the annual weed competition. You'll get a lot of foxtail and ragweed coming up in the first growing season. And as a general rule of thumb, you want to mow when the planting is about a height of 12 inches or knee high down to about 6 inches. And this is really going to help your seedlings get more sunlight and able to grow. Really try to aim to mow at least twice, and try to move your mower height up each time you mow to prevent from clipping the tops of your seedlings. It's okay if you get some of the tops clipped off, but the biggest thing here is mowing too late whenever it's too tall can start to smother your seedlings. So be sure to monitor and evaluate early and often. Many of the native annuals will be blooming yellow, such as Coreopsis. You can see those a lot on the first year plantings. And it's okay if you're not seeing a lot of diversity in the first and really even the second year. Just what I recommend is use your seed tag, keep a checklist of your species that you've identified, and the saying for these plantings goes sleep, creep, leap. These are really the expectations in your first 3 growing seasons. Just have patience and remember that a lot of these forbs are establishing extensive root systems before we see them above ground. So it might not be until 3rd growing season that your planting really shows good diversity. And as for long-term management, prescribed fire is going to be the best management tool in your toolbox. And I'm sure Jeff is going to talk a little bit more about management after my presentation. But this is just an example. This is a first-year Monarch planting I took a picture of this past year, and I believe I took this at the end of May, and so he kind of forgot his to mow this at first, and so we were wanting to make sure that he got on top of that, because even though it is a lot of ragweed here, and that's good for birds, it's also a lot of competition, and you really had to kind of look below here and start seeing some of those seedlings popping up. So again, we wanted to mow this down and get some control of those annuals. But you can also see this doesn't always happen, but he had some milkweed in this field previously, and he really didn't want to mow that down. I was like, okay, so we were like, let's just mow around that. This is a good family friend that did this planting, so I got to follow this one pretty closely. I can't wait to see what it's going to look like next year. So why do plantings fail? And these are the top reasons that I see plantings fail whenever I'm doing spot checks or quality reviews for NRCS on a lot of our Monarch contracts. And really, first and foremost, I see it as inadequate or rush site prep. And so, unfortunately, some of the program contract deadlines don't always line up with what our site prep timeline is. And so a lot of times I'll see that they didn't get as many sprayings on their fescue, and maybe they planted into this and it's really heavy thatch, and just didn't control that competing vegetation adequately because they were really rushed for time to get something completed in their contract. Invasives, if they're not previously addressed, such as Sericea, that's a big issue that I've seen, and before you know it, you've got Sericea taking over your very expensive native forb planting. And this is also for follow-up monitoring as well. Maybe they got a couple pasture guard treatments, but they didn't, follow up on spot spraying. And so later on down the road, it got a lot harder to handle. And then establishment mowings, if they're not completed that first year and those seedlings are really, really struggling to get to the sunlight and start establishing. So, landowners can get confused when to and not to mow, because we like to recommend that they not mow, but that's really as a standalone practice for long-term management. It is extremely detrimental for them to control annual competition during the first year by mowing as often as they can, making sure to not clip the seedlings as much. Just wanted to end here on cost share programs, and there is a plethora of the alphabet soup that it's available in terms of different types of programs. And there's state and NGO programs that are available in Missouri. Conservation Department, we have the Landowner and Community Assistance Program. There's even a little bit of a Monarch incentive if you get Monarch milkweed specification in your mix. We've got Habitat Challenge Grant with our partners, Quail Forever and Pheasants Forever. There are also different soil and water conservation district incentives that landowners can look at. And there are just tons of different programs that are out there and available. The next gen habitat projects with the Bee and Butterfly Habitat Fund, that's another program opportunity that landowners can tap into. Otherwise, you've got the federal programs, and most of these coming out of the Farm Bill. And so Environmental Quality Incentives Program, or EQIP, that's really big. Popular. Working Lands for Wildlife have the Monarch and Quail initiatives that are, a direct approach at habitat for those species. You also have CSP, the Conservation Stewardship Program, that has different monarch enhancements that you can plant. Conservation Reserve Program, if you meet that cropping history, that's an FSA program that's administered by NRCS, and that could be an option if you're wanting to turn some red acres into good monarch habitat. That could be an option when those signups are available. And then the Regional Conservation Partnership Program, there's a lot of different kinds across the state, but we do have the program Restoring and Improving Monarch Ecosystems Prime, as well as a newer grassland habitat initiative that our PLCs are taking the lead on. And then there's the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service Partners Program. They have several partner biologists across the state. And these cost share programs, they can be very confusing. There's a lot of different ones and different program rules and guidelines and eligibility, things like that. So I'll just leave it here. Contact your local NDC private land conservationist for more information. You can also reach out to one of our partner staff. We have a lot of Pheasants Forever, Quail Forever staff that deal with these programs as well. And then just to end on a good note here, we do have funding opportunities for both EQIP and CSP in Missouri. Deadlines were set for January 16th of 2026. So if that's something that you're interested in, contact your local PLC or NRCS office to get more information on how to apply for that. All right. Well, Bill, I'm going to turn it back over to you. I don't know if we have any questions or time for questions that I could take.
Yeah. In fact, Kyle Hedges has his hand up. Kyle, you can unmute yourself if you got a question. And
Yeah, just curious, and maybe Jeff will cover it. So woe me, but you mentioned clethodim for dealing with grass, and so
Mhm.
looking at those plantings that have been in the ground for 3, 4, 5 years, burning them in midwinter or whatever, but you start getting the grass not fescue. I'm talking Indian grass, right, or all big
Mhm.
blue. Have you had much luck with clethodim smacking that? I've got a specific spot in mind that fought a lot of Johnson grass in establishment, so disking is not really an option.
Mhm.
Anyway, how have you done? Have you had much luck with clethodim on warm season grass suppression?
In my experience, I haven't seen as much effectiveness as I have on the cool seasons, and that's unfortunate. I've just found fire to be targeting that if at all possible, if you can do some of those summer burns that could set that back. But that's a question that I've had as well. And actually, one of these demonstration plantings, we're going to be doing some trials on herbicide application, because we did an interseeding situation that was an old one of our conservation areas had a really rank, thick, warm season grasses, primarily Indian grass, blue stem mix, and so that's kind of what we're gonna look at. And we've played around with spraying and burning, and then just burning alone. And we're supposed to be following up this summer to see what we can accomplish with clethodim and maybe a couple other herbicide options. And so be happy to let you know what we end up seeing after we get done with those trials.
Appreciate it. Yeah, I've had good luck, rank CRP plantings or whatever with
Mm-hmm.
Arsenal, Craig Harper's recipe, that kind of stuff. But
Mm-hmm.
in a pollinator situation that's 4, 5, 6 years in, it's a whole different ball game where I
Yeah.
don't turn loose with Arsenal. So anyway, common
Yeah.
problem seems
Yeah.
to be.
Yeah. Good question.
we also have a question on the chat from Jessica. She asks, is site prep required for small restorations like a backyard meadow about a half acre in size?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. Site prep, again, your goal is you want good seed to soil contact. And so if you're in a smaller situation, I guess half acre is a little bit bigger, but looking at some of those organic site prep methods in my own backyard, I just did some smaller scale 10 by 10 plantings, and I've had really good success with utilizing cardboard and shading that out. But you can still use your glyphosate or whatever you need to do to get that competing vegetation off the ground. And again, I try to minimize soil disturbance as much as possible, but still something that's very important if you're doing a seeding. Even if you're doing potted plants, you want to make sure that you control some of that fescue. And in a backyard setting, you're always going to have that fescue that's trying to creep in, and so it'll be a little bit of a battle. But you can utilize mulching in situations like that if you're doing a smaller planting, landscape style. But larger planting, half acre, you're going to have constant kind of battling of the grasses, because unfortunately they don't see boundary lines of our pollinator plots.
Okay, very good. Thank you, Rachel, for your presentation. Other questions for Rachel before we move on to Jeff? Jeff, you want to pull up your slides?
And I'll do my best here.
So our next speaker is Jeff Powelson. He's with the Central Hardwoods Joint Venture, the program coordinator for them, and he's going to talk about maintaining your planting. And I can see your
Yeah.
slide deck.
Yep. You can see what?
I can see your slide deck.
Now, hold on here. If I don't close out. Trying to get in presentation mode here for me. Okay, how about that?
Yep, I can see it. Very good. Thank you.
I'm trying to get rid of my folks. Okay. Sorry about that, guys. Why is it not? I can see the slide deck, but I can't see mine.
Are you using more than one screen?
Yep.
Okay. Yeah, I had to stop sharing and then I just shared the particular screen of that. I had to have all of my stuff for uh, the Zoom on my main and then share that optional screen. So you might have to move your PowerPoint window over and then reshare the full screen.
Okay, you're seeing my full screen now, though.
Yeah.
And that's what I'm seeing. I need my notes. Damn it. Sorry, guys. Shows my age. Well, I guess I can. Sorry, Bill. I'm just trying to pull up my on my second screen here. Okay, we'll just go from here. Yeah, it won't even let me stop sharing to restart it. I'm afraid to close out and you'll lose me completely. Because now you'll see you guys. Okay, you still see my deck, or do you see my notes?
Um, I see your presentation slide, and then your next slide is also displayed.
Okay.
Hey, Jeff, I was
Yeah.
looking, I don't know, maybe you already tried this, but on the very bottom of my screen, when you had the presentation pulled up, or all the way to the right, there's the three little buttons, and it says more, and I clicked on it and I looked in it. There's a deal that says notes.
Okay.
Now, because of my age, that's all I can help you with.
Well, I apologize. Now I think I even got rid of my gosh darn it. That's really bad. Okay. I think I okay, how are we doing now?
I can see your screen. It's not in presentation mode.
Yay. All
There we go.
right.
There we go.
Okay, sorry about that, folks. All right. Well, Dave and Rachel set us up really good, and I appreciate the detail that Rachel went into. And I may skip a few things, but everything should tie in really well. And I may not answer all your questions because if we do a 30-minute deal, um management is goes beyond a 30-minute cycle. But yep, my name is Jeff Powelson. I'm a conservation delivery coordinator. I'm with the Central Hardwoods joint venture. And of course, folks might say, what in the world's a joint venture? Joint ventures were developed back in the late 80s from the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, the migratory waterfowl management plans off the bird conservation regions. There's 22 JVs in the U.S., but since then, these JVs have evolved into all bird JVs. Our Central Hardwoods joint venture works with the forest and grassland conservation for birds and pollinators that are an important piece of that. But we focus not only just on birds, but we promote biodiversity through sound science-based management. We do from oak hickory forest, shortleaf pine ecosystems, open canopy woodlands, savannas, glades, grasslands, and prairie management. Our joint venture covers 10 states here in the Midwest, from Missouri to Arkansas to Illinois, Kentucky, Tennessee, northern Alabama, and we even touch Kansas, Oklahoma, and Ohio. So, some of you folks may know me and some may not, but Jeff Powelson, I'm a grandpa of two boys that I want to instill the importance of listening to nature. I spent 26 years wearing MDC's triangle. 5 of those years were in wildlife, and the last 21 years was in the private lands division, working with landowners. I spent a year with Stantec Consulting as their restoration ecologist in the Midwest, on their Midwest region. But in my last 3 years, I've been, currently as the delivery coordinator for the joint venture, and look forward to um, continuing to work with NRCS in those 10 states. So I have the highest respect for the biologists and foresters who work with landowners with their properties. And currently have 2 farms and where we manage for native grass, wildflowers, forest, and wildlife. So that's a little bit about me. And now we'll just get into it. So as Dave mentioned early on, pollinators sustained wildland plant communities that provide food and shelter for a myriad of other wildlife. Pollinators are an indispensable component of the healthy ecosystem, and food is a basic human need. So they all tie together, as we heard earlier. And without pollinators, humans would go hungry. So birds, bats, bees, butterflies, beetles, flies, small animals that pollinate plants are responsible for bringing us 1 out of every 3 bites of food. And that's just something we always need to keep in mind when we're working with within the ecosystem. So at least 25% of North America's bumblebee species have undergone significant declines, including the rusty patch bumblebee, as David mentioned. They were formerly common and widespread through habitat loss, insecticide exposure, disease, all contributing factors. Similarly, butterflies have undergone significant declines, and I won't get into that much other than, as we talk about the monarch butterfly is found across North America. It's experienced a decline of up roughly 80% east of the Rockies and up to 50% west of the Rockies. So the loss of breeding habitat that includes the monarch milkweed as a host plant, this is a significant factor contributing to this decline. So the question is, how do we manage what is left and what are we implementing to improve? So when we manage pollinator plantings, it's important to understand how it was installed or the history of the planting. And Rachel did a great job on that prep work. So one of the things I always instilled was questions you have to ask if you're coming into managing one that you don't know the history. You need to find out as best you can. How was the seeding done? Was it drilled? Was it done in the dormant seeding? Was it done in the growing season? Was it broadcasted? Was it bare soil? Was it duff? This can make a huge difference in the development of a successful stand. This may also depend on the size of your planting. As the question earlier is, a small patch of your backyard, a quarter acre, half acre, up to 5 acres. Maybe it's 100 acres. You may get a delayed response just because you broadcast it if it wasn't cultipacted before and after. All of these matter on your prep work. So the better seed to soil contact, the better chance of germination with the right amount of post-planting care. What was the moisture like during or after planting? I know Rachel mentioned a drought. That's a huge factor. Mother Nature plays within our establishment periods. So understanding these planting conditions should really help discuss response times for germination. And I don't have to go into these. Rachel did a great job explaining different ways that these pollinators can be planted. So understanding your pre-existing conditions can really help you in planning the finishing part or the latter management side of it. Asking about the history of the planting area. How was it killed out? Was it grazed prior? Was it farmed? What was the herbicide history? All these can play major factors in the establishment. And hopefully that was done before the planning. But sometimes we walk into these conditions and we don't know. So those are things you have to try to help find answers to. And what was the residual layer like when planting? And Rachel went into that as well. So now we got the prep work done, right? Seeds in the ground. Now what? One of the biggest mistakes I see folks think all the hard work's done, but the mentality, the year, the prep work, the seeds finally in the ground, now the pretty flowers grow. Well, as anyone with any experience knows, that's far from correct. So please help your cooperators understand that the work doesn't stop. They need to start planning out the next 2 years of management options. And it's okay to adjust the plans as Mother Nature is not always friendly. So make sure flexibility is in your conversation and make sure it's in there early. So work with cooperators to explain to them this doesn't happen overnight. You're working with someone for the next 3+ years, possibly the rest of your career, teaching them to understand the good, the bad, and the ugly of plants. So know what you're trying to control versus what you're trying to grow is an important on the methods you're going to use to implement. So one of the things I recommend for each project is to schedule out what I always call the summer monthly walk around to keep things in order and not get behind on the weed control. So know what equipment the cooperator has is important. Is that equipment available? Is it in working condition? How many days does the landowner need in advance to plan a strategy to mow or spray? These are all things we just always try to incorporate in our planning of our management. I always use the barrel of patience method. Um, Rachel mentioned that sleep, creep, and leap phrase. You know, year one isn't just the planting, it includes the first set of maintenance steps. We should have I could have always handed out a barrel of patience to each cooperator. Say, hey, here you go. Here's 55 gallons of patience. I always said the first year, the sleep year, is the top half of the barrel. There's a lot going on. The second year is kind of the creep year. It's the bottom third of the barrel. So getting a better hold on the management with some response. And then year three, we hope that's the leap year. That's when you're really starting to see the changes of the the plants that you're wanting to respond. And for those that do like bourbon, it's like a good bourbon. You know, drink slow and drink one at a time. You'll get to the bottom of that barrel eventually. So as we well know, just having the seed in the ground is not enough. It's just the beginning of your management. And then the first growing season after seed germination, it's very important to ensure that the seedlings don't get shaded out by weeds. So if you look at those slides on the left, the photos to the left, those seed germinating, there was a really good pre-emergent used. And it was the Mazapic or Plateau was used for that. And that was a grass planting, and it was followed up the following fall with the Forbes. So just a different way. They had a lot of stuff they had to control and kill. Same county, the picture in the middle under the pretty doesn't happen overnight phrase. There was no pre-emergent. There was 2 rounds of herbicide in the summer and fall, and then it was a very wet spring, and so mowing was the only option that they had. So we talk about mowing. Mowing's not something we want to do the rest of our lives or the rest of this management, the life of the field, but you know, we periodically manning to a height of 8 to 10 inches. When the vegetation reaches 18 inches, I know Rachel mentioned knees. I always said shin high. You need to have the mower hooked up to the tractor, ready to go. Biggest thing is just do it before the plants go to seed. You're looking at versus the second growing season. If annual grasses like your foxtail, your crabgrass comprise more than 25% of the stand, you need to be mowing. Think about that 8 to 10 inches in height before they go to seed. Mow the planting as needed during the summer months to control the weeds to keep them from flowering. That 8 to 10 inches, 6 to 8, 10 to 12, just keep them below your knees is always a good rule of thumb. Biggest thing is just clip it off, clip the flower buds off on the existing weeds, and don't let the weeds get taller than your knees. Don't hesitate to mow because some of the plants are flowering, because some of your early annuals might be flowering. That's okay. There's a sacrifice there in the other weed control to get those other plants that are developing the root systems. One of the things I like to say is mow short, mow often. I know most cooperators won't understand this, but it's like in the forestry world. You do a forest stand improvement scenario in the woods, which is a thinning. A lot of foresters would say, well, maybe I could have cut a little more. Most cooperators won't mow enough the first year. And so this is why I stress the summer monthly walk around site visits to help stay on track with that management. I hope that makes sense. There's a lot going on with that, but those those summer walk around site visits they'll vary from project to project. So the hat on the ground is a good visual to understand if this management is needed. And this was second year, this was in the creep year, later summer, was at the points like, you know what? I think your mowing's done. Let's let these plants rest. And um, so just use different visuals because every site's going to be different. Don't mow for cosmetic purposes. The first year we're telling you mow, maybe it's every 3 or 4 weeks. Second year's going to change, but it always depends. Mother Nature may control that. If it's a drought, you may not have to mow at all. So we can use spot mowing when it's appropriate. So this is kind of in that year 2, maybe even year 3. Um, you limit the mowing to the patches of weeds rather than the entire swath of the vegetation. This will reduce the impacts of your current pollinators. You can adjust your mowing height. So as the summer goes on, you can actually move that mower height up. Go back to earlier when I said understand what your landowners have. I've worked with landowners, they didn't have brush hogs, they didn't have big mowers and big tractors. They had what I call hobby tractors with belly mowers. The maximum height on a lot of those is like 8 inches. So that throws challenges in it as well because a lot of your midsummer weeds will will always be taller than 8 inches. So the kicker is with that is don't wait till they get too tall because you'll smother. And I know Rachel had touched on that. So avoid mowing when pollinators are active. Bees, butterflies, and other pollinators are less active earlier in the morning, at dusk, at night. I know most people aren't going to mow at night, but just think about the life cycle of your pollinators. And adults are a lot less likely to be able to escape the mower's blades by doing this. Avoid mowing at these active times in the middle of the day would be good. You can also use a flushing bar on your tractor or in front of your mower. Um, these flushing bars can encourage your adult pollinators to fly out of the vegetation before the mower blades reach them. So now like I said, this is kind of now we're in that second, third year, maybe even fourth or fifth. Stuff's been starting to get established. We're still thinking these are some different options on mowing as a tool. And hopefully eventually we can put the mower away. But mowing practices after establishment can negatively impact your pollinators by temporarily removing the flowering plants. That's why we don't use mowing just to mow. Frequent mowing can significantly reduce the quality of habitat. Mowing can kill your butterfly caterpillars and other pollinators that spend their larval stage on vegetation. It can destroy bumblebee colonies. So other reasons why we need to look at some other avenues once we get the establishment going. You look at the map here. This is the map from the Department of Transportation map. And in the Midwest, you can look at this is for monarchs. This is just if they're going to manage for monarchs, say in their roadways, just something to think about. Early spring, late, into fall, not during that summertime. So that's just one map. There's lots of information out there. So we talked about mowing a lot. Mow early, mow short, but now we're into what else is needed. And we look at chemistry. I know Kyle may have had a question I may not be able to answer, but I can give him a different scenario that has helped me. Herbicide applications may be useful for treating dense clumps of weeds or where weeds are significantly taller than the wildflowers. Herbicides can be applied in a targeted manner with a backpack sprayer, a wick bar applicator. These applications may need to be applied in year 1, year 2, or even in year 3 and beyond, but they should be targeted efforts, especially the farther you get into your management. They should be more specifically targeted versus a broadcast application. So timing, um, you want to get the most effective based on herbicides, mode of action, and the application's technique. So when using a systemic herbicide, you can treat perennial weeds in the late summer and fall. Of course, during this period, your perennials begin to move the sugars down their roots, and the herbicides will be translocated to vegetative reproductive structures, where it's most effective to control the plant. You can apply herbicides at the vulnerable life stage. This is most successful when the weed is most vulnerable to make these applications. Could be when the seeding is in the seedling stage or rosette stage, like in the fall, like on thistles. Establishing protocols to time applications as effective as possible can benefit pollinators and may increase efficiency and cost savings. Developing a control calendar that identifies key weeds and the best windows for control can help you identify the optimum time for applications. One of the things I recommend is go to your local ag store or ag dealer, whoever you work with for herbicides, and ask them most of them will have a chart for the herbicides, specific herbicides they sell, the specific brands they sell. And that'll help you a lot, give a better understanding and maybe even share with your cooperators on when to apply, what these herbicides are for so they can pick the correct ones. Here's a big one on herbicide application. Avoid spraying when weather conditions increase drift. Um, and I think this is more common sense, but it's just something we want to stress that, you get wind speeds pushing above 10 to over a 15 mile an hour, you need to avoid spraying at the time. You want to avoid applications during temperature inversions. This is where the warmer air traps your cooler air. This can cause herbicides and other pesticides to linger in the air where they can move off site, which is something you need to be cautious with. And at the same time, if you're dealing with pollinators adjacent to crop fields, and if you're seeing an adverse effect, maybe that has happened. So talking to those permittee farmers can be a good way to get a better understanding of what's going on. Of course, can't stress enough with herbicides, follow the label direction. Apply it according to the label, ensures the correct use, and then use the minimum concentration. More is not always better. Read the label, follow the label, use the amount that's directed. So herbicides used to control noxious weeds or encroaching woody vegetation can benefit pollinators by suppressing these undesirable plants that displace the valuable native plants. When used indiscriminately, you can reduce the quality of habitat by removing the floral resources and the host plants. Overuse of herbicides, just like overuse of mowing, can weaken stands of vegetation, so making them more vulnerable to weed invasions, which is the opposite of what we're wanting to do. So look at the application management. You control your undesirables, manage your invasives, use what is needed. So understanding your conditions, and that's going to change from site to site. So more on the chemistry stuff. Location can determine what's encroaching on your plantings. So woody encroachment issues. A lot of times with these pollinator plots, if they're not if they don't have enough grass in them, and there's a lot of bare ground, and they're adjacent to wood lines, wooded areas, fence lines, this is where we can get a lot of issues with woody encroachment. So specific herbicides that impact woody encroachment can have a negative impact on broadleaf forbs. So using select herbicides formulated to control specific weeds or groups of weeds is best when available versus non-selective herbicides, which typically if it's green and it touches it, it'll kill it or it'll set it back. So selective herbicides are going to be more impactful, things like Outrider for Johnson grass, Remedy, Pasture Guard for Sericea control versus a 2,4-D is going to hammer a lot of stuff. So biggest thing is avoiding damage to non-targeting plants. Spot spraying versus broadcast. Look at those charts. Calibrate your sprayer. Make sure it's applying it right. Um, Recognizing your weeds. Learn to identify your plants. Um, can you recognize noxious? Can you recognize invasives? Can you distinguish them from similar non-targeted species? If you don't know, ask and learn. You can use weed wipers. You can use backpack sprayers. There's a lot of ways to do so you can target those applications to your unwanted plants. When selecting and calibrating equipment, it's important to consider one thing to consider is drift management. So your nozzles will produce larger droplets, less likely to allow drift to off-target species. And if you calibrate your equipment regularly to avoid over application, this will avoid wasting herbicide and money. And once again, consider your wind speed. Anything over 15 mile an hour, avoid spraying as well. Recognize sensitive remnant habitat. So if you're using a broadcast treatment, maintain a buffer zone typically of 30 to 50 feet if you can. And then if you're spot treating, just consider flagging your sensitive species that are needed in protection. So treating weeds before they flower. You can adjust the timing of applications. Reduce that direct contact to pollinators. Just as we're seeing here, where these, when your bees are active, and just reduce your exposure to the caterpillars. Avoiding these broadcast applications of systemic herbicides with long residuals can reduce exposure to the butterflies and moth caterpillars that can be poisoned by consuming them. So we talk about timing is everything. So we want to go from a heavy grass area to more of a forb diverse planting. Grasses and wildflower stands that have become dominated by grasses. We can use grass select herbicide treatments that may be used to restore the wildflower component of the stand. A lot of times your native wildflower seeds may reside in the soil for many years without germinating if they're completely shaded out by the grasses or other vegetation. And of course, thinning of the existing grass stand can provide the light needed to prompt germination of these existing weeds. We talked about mowing, we talked about chemistry. One option is disking. That's not a favored practice, and I even heard Rachel mention disking on prep work, unless it's followed up with um, cultipacking. But when we're disking these fields, we always have a chance of releasing invasives, unwanted seed. You have a potential of washboarding, erosion, and a lot of times all it does is it just puts a layer of thatch down on top. And at the same time, disking can also eliminate ground nesting bees. So I avoid the disking unless it's an absolute. But one of the big things is make sure you understand whatever you're working with, if you're in a program, a state or federal program, what your options are. And that may be one of the only options you can use if fire or chemical is not. But don't do anything that would put you out of compliance. So this moves us on to the next option for prescribed fire as a potential tool for managing. Prescribed fire, control burns, which is one of my favorite options if possible. It's typically introduced during the third growing season and beyond. It's one of the best tools you can use throughout or past establishment phase. And this is where having some grass species comes in handy to help carry a flame through these pollinator plantings. And fire can be one of the best tools if it's planned accordingly. So understand the why of the fire, get the training, not only for you, but get the training for the cooperator, get the burn plan. Burn plan probably should be started actually the first year of planting. That gives you time to get that burn plan approved or whatever is needed. Know your resources, and then, of course, encourage the landowners or the cooperators to ask for help. Maybe it's a local PBA, maybe it's a neighborhood, uh, maybe it's a hunting group, but just make sure they understand that it's not something that they do on their own. Fire can remove accumulated plant litter, controlling woody plants. Prescribed burning can enhance both wildflower and warm season grasses. It exposes the seed to sunlight, releases your nutrients that are bound up in the plant litter. The best time to prescribe for prescribed fire and wildflower stands is typically early fall. Burning at this time is most effectively for controlling woody vegetation. Winter burns can encourage wildflowers, but it's less effective on your woody encroachment. Spring burns will favor your warm season grasses and avoid burning during the primary nesting season. And those are kind of some standard dates. But I will have to say, a good July 16th burn can really knock back your Indian grass for a season or two. I've had very good luck with my midsummer burns, even though that's in that some of that nesting period. But we also go back to fire and even the herbicide and even the mowing. If we go back to these management practices, if we can do them on a third or a half of the acreage that we're managing, so you're not eliminating all the cover, you're not eliminating all those winter stems for stem nesting pollinators. But I do like a midsummer to early fall to really set back the grasses. You really expose those grass crowns to those early fall freezes. You can always follow up with a herbicide, a grass-only herbicide as well, to really set them back if you're going to do a overseed forbs after a summer or fall burn. Here's an example of smooth brome this was a 15-year-old prairie planting. It was very high, diverse wildflower roadside planting. And over the years, the smooth brome from the neighbors was just kept encroaching in. And we did a burn on May 4th. It was a slow burn, really set back the grasses. As you can see on the May 9th, that's a prairie dock. But there's ones behind it just starting 5 days later, they're starting to grow. And even the common milkweed was coming up just 5 days later. Woody control. That same burn we had, we top killed. So we knew we were going to have to come back in and do some cut and stub treatments on the regrowth. 17 days later, you can look at the forb diversity in there. The smooth brome is gone. No herbicide was used. It doesn't mean the smooth brome was completely dead, but it aggressively knocked it back. It allowed those forbs to really come on, the wildflowers to really come on. It was the same for the woody invasions. So that so on the woodies, like I said, it's kind of a two punch method. You could do it, you set it back, you top kill it. It opens up your area to where you can go in and see where these sprouts are, and you can go in and treat them with a cut stump treatment method on herbicides. Here's another reason to make sure timing is effective. The burn was prior to our early blooms. So within 5 days after that May 4th burn, these Baptisia, this indigo, I think David mentioned this is one of the really good ones for an early bloomers, really just expressed. And you can see where the brome's not completely dead, but a lot of it was completely burned out or brown. And then think about leaving unburned vegetation if you can. And rotating these burn acres can vary in your burn times. It's a really good opportunity to for success on that. Something else we can talk about is flash grazing. It can be an option for management. Folks can use goats to help with woody and weed control prior to plantings. This would be early in that barrel. This would be early when you're trying to figure out how do I get rid of stuff. Sheep may be used for solar areas to help with maintaining height control once vegetation is planted. And then cattle can likely be used just to remove litter and heavy grass on a forage side of things. But make sure you visit with your local contact before you try grazing. Make sure you're not out of compliance, you're not doing anything you shouldn't do. If you have a really bad infestation of weeds, you can look at haying to remove the competition, but make sure your equipment is clean before you put it on your acreage. You don't want to introduce anything else. think David mentioned this as well. Shrubs can be pollinators too, so don't forget about your shrubs. Many of these native shrubs provide a fantastic food source for your pollinating animals, especially early in spring. Their timing of blooms can be valuable food sources. These shrubs can be planted adjacent to your pollinator plots. Shrubs can be maintained with something as simple as mowing every so often to stimulate new growth, or even running after they're well established. You can run a fire through there and cause resprouts as well. And of course, pollinators have a place beyond agriculture. I always like to throw this out, as well as landscaping. But your management options may be more challenging. So, depending on your location and your network or your partnerships you work with, pollinators can be a great option. Just understand the challenges that come with it. So, some key takeaways: there's multiple practices to use, but each season may bring a different challenge. Talk with your specialist, your PLCs, your PLBs, your biologists, extension agents, your ag specialist. Get the information sooner than you need it. Plan ahead. Try to be prepared. The more you stay on top of the weeds, the better. And remember that barrel of patience. Drink slow, one drink at a time. It takes patience, patience, patience. I know that was a quick rundown, but that wraps up my presentation. So let me know if you have any questions or if you want any further detail.
Are there any questions for Jeff? Jeff, there's nothing in the chat right now.
Oh, I just dumped out, didn't I? Dadnammit.
That's okay.
Oh, I'm still on? Good. Okay, sorry. I thought I dumped out.
So with no questions, I'm going to share my screen and show you some information for upcoming trainings as it relates to native grass. Jeff, can you see my screen? So
I don't see it, Bill.
You don't see it?
No, your Federation emblem, your logo's showing.
But I'm not sharing my screen. Let me see here.
Jeff's is still up. I see.
Mine's still up?
Yeah.
Here.
There we go. Jeff's is down.
There we go.
There you go. No.
So there, can you see my screen?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. So the Native Grass Collaborative is working with partners just like we have today, putting on some additional training, especially as it relates to native grasses, native plants. In January, we're going to have a webinar, Economics of Using Native Grasses, with Dr. Drew Kinsey talking about native forage economics, and Dr. Mark McConnell from Mississippi State talking about edge of field buffer economics and a tool that he is using. February 3rd, this is pre-conference to the Missouri Natural Resources Conference. So you don't need to register for MNRC to attend this, but we are having a all-day or most of a day workshop. I'm going to start off talking about some pollinator things that are going on, and some native bee response to some pollinator plantings in Northeast Missouri. And then the rest of the day is going to be mostly about native grasses for hanging and grazing, and a number of speakers connected to that. We are offering a lunch, so I do need people to register if they want to attend this for the lunch. And my email, if you do not have these announcements already, you can email me and I can get those announcements to you so you can register. In addition, and we're working on these right now, so we don't have agendas up and specific dates, but we will be announcing these later in early 2026. We've got a livestock watering and fencing training, a hands-on approach in the very end of March into April. Going to try and get it all done before turkey season starts. Also in April and March, we've got a landscaping with natives webinar. That'll be followed up in the summer with some tours of some home landscaping examples. In May, we're going to offer again the forage plant ID training that we've done in the past. That's going to be hands-on. And in June, we're hoping to do some in-field evaluations and new seedings in the field, and it'll be interactive, and we'll discuss what's been done right and or what's been done wrong, and ways to correct what we see in the field. Again, today's webinar was recorded, and if everything works right, it will be up on our YouTube channel, and I've got that listed there. That way we'll be able to share it with others, or you can download those presentations and get more information if you missed some of it. So with that, I am going to sign out. I very much appreciate Jeff, Rachel, and David and their help in getting this put together and making the presentations. So any questions before we leave?
Now, Bill, Rachel, all of our contact info is in the chat if anybody wants to reach out to anybody. So
okay, good. Excellent. Again, thank you guys for your presentations and helping me get this put together. And thanks everyone for your attendance.
Thanks for the invite.
thanks, Bill.